there's two other reasons that I love to grow Jerusalem artichokes. And I mentioned it in there, that maybe that's one of the things that got misprinted. They are a wonderful nectary. They have loads of flowers, loads of flowers. It's a composite flower, and so the bees just adore them. And it's not just the bees, every bug in the world. That Perconid wasp that's going to lay 300 eggs, maybe no broccoli's flower, and she's over there feeding on the artichoke flowers. So they're just spectacular that way. And you can actually figure it out. You can grow one called Stampede that'll be flowering in late August, and then you can get a couple different of the other varieties, and they won't be quite as early as late August, but they'll be spread out a little bit. You can get them to bloom probably for much of the fall. And right then is a prime time to be building your future control for the next years. If your beneficial insects and your pests, now that's the whole thing. You can't have a vibrant garden full of beneficial insects without having pests. The thing is, it's in balance, and you're okay. And indeed, by the way, something to know that's really exciting is if your plants have been eaten on by insects, not disease, now we talked about disease, that can cause some chemical reactions that are bad for us, but if they've been eaten by insects, their response to insects is to make more antioxidants. So they're actually better for you. So a little bit of damage, no big deal. You don't want them torn up. You want to be able to get some food. You don't want it to be that you can see through it, but a little bit of damage, no problem. And so all your beneficials and the pest, right, but in balance, get huge amounts of fat built up from these heavy feeds, from things like Jerusalem artichokes and other things that are blooming this time of year. Really, of the roots, that's the one I can think of that's great. And so then, when it's wintertime, the ones that there's some that lay eggs. They're gonna be able to lay better eggs and have more fat in them and all that too, more food for their things. But for the ones that are just trying to get in a crack and make it through the winter, which is what a lot of them do, ladybugs, for example, the more fat they got, the better their chances. So that big feed is a big deal. So that's one thing. The other thing is, one part we're certainly not using on the artichokes, and even if you were using the leaves for tea for people with diabetes, the stalks are wonderful for your compost pile. It turns out that when I was young, what I thought was the best thing for compost was what was going to make it hot. And so it was like, coffee grounds, manure, high protein food waste. I wanted that pile hot. That was the thing. The pile had to be hot. And it turns out that what I really need is for the pile to breathe well, and there to be lots of carbon that's slow to break down so the fungi get to eat too. And so all those stalks from the Jerusalem artichokes, from the yacon, spectacular for compost. So, and it's tempting to just kind of like not deal with them. They die and they frost and then they stand for a long time and then big winds come and they blow through and then they fall down, they get snow on them. You let that happen, you just fed your soil, but you won't be using them for your compost pile. What you want to do actually is consider them another crop. And once they're frost killed and there's no more energy to go back into the artichokes, go out there and harvest them and get them in the dry till you're ready to make compost. Don't let them rot away. Treat them like I really do think of them as gold. Stalks are to be harvested. If you're trying to make good compost. Burdock. Anybody ever eaten burdock? We eat it all the time at our house. We often buy it because we don't take the time to dig it, but it's right there. And actually I have these, I should bring them down. I think actually Meredith put it in the soup. Basically, we bought burdock seed once from Johnny's and planted it, and now it's basically gone feral all over the garden. And of course, it's not that pure, narrow strain that it used to be. It's crossed with the wild burdock. But it's still, those aren't bad roots. They took me like no time at all to dig. They're kind of small. I purposely took small ones because I wanted to be sure that they'd be tender. I actually meant to bring them down for you to taste, and I will go up and get them. We could chop them up and you can get a little taste of them raw. They're fine to eat raw too. But basically, burdock can get huge, right? We've had garden leaves out there. There's probably still some up at the top of the garden up there like this, And so then the roots are huge too. The roots are huge. What they're doing, they're going down deep and pulling up minerals. So burdock is famous for being good for you. It's particularly noted as being good for people with gout, for a buildup of uric acid. But it's got all kinds of other reasons why it's good for you. But we like it just because it adds a little bit of an earthy flavor, and it's just more diversity in a stir fry. So we eat it several times a week anyways. And actually I bought one to show you. The Japanese ones, perfectly straight, you know, just bred to be like, none of these side things and all that. And so that's more convenient, you know, but this works fine. You know, you can use this fine. And I tend to be the kind of person, like the average person, the cherry tomatoes, they don't rip them out. The ones that come up in the compost pile, of course, they eat those too. When blight happens, that's what they have left, you know. That's kind of what this is, you know. It's there, why would I rip it out? It's going down deep, pulling up the minerals, and anytime I want burdock, I can get it, if I remember to dig it. Stems can also be, I think, peeled and fried, and that's something we're going to go back to. It turns out that a whole lot of the plants we've already looked at, there's other uses for the rest of the plant, you know. It's, you know, they're not just about the root, but the root's the main food thing we grow them for, but you can actually eat other parts or use them for other things, like the yacon for tea for diabetics, stuff like that. And it turns out the one farmer I know that specialized in this was Hart Squire. He supplied the co-op and I guess other places with burdock. And he bought from a Japanese company, a really fancy seed, you know, more expensive probably, but just even better production and nicer and straighter, probably quicker and whatnot than Johnny's will sell you. And he also learned from those seedsmen that the way they do it for like large scale production is they basically plant them in straw and feed them. So then they're perfectly straight and long when they come out. And that sounds great, but what's the problem? I've already talked about it today. What might be the problem with that? Right, it's a bioaccumulator. It's not getting down in there. You know, it's like the whole point of why it's so good for you is getting down and getting those minerals. What kind of minerals is it getting in a bale of straw? You know, it's nice and straight and tender and looks good, but that tends to be the way we go with food. You know, we take what is wild about it and nutritious about it, you know, and life-sustaining about it, and actually usually earth-sustaining too, because of course we're not going to eat the leaves, right? And so they're going to fall down and rot and have brought minerals from down deep. But if they grew in straw, no minerals, you know? Yeah?
Is that the same for mushrooms? I talked to a guy yesterday that did some pink oysters, and he said that out of convenience they propagate them in cardboard or corrugated.
Actually, it's possibly less so with mushrooms because they grow on cellulose, you know? But cardboard, there's probably less nutrition in that mushroom than something else, you know. It's growing on a tree, there's other sugars and minerals in there, you know. That cardboard was a tree, but boy, it sure has been processed by now, you know. So yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, I think it's a good use of cardboard that can't be recycled, you know. And then the feedstock, what's interesting about that is that when mushrooms are grown, oftentimes the spawn that's left, you know, the mycelia that was left, is way nutritious. We may not want to eat it, but it's oftentimes wonderful animal food. So that cardboard wasn't very nutritious, but then the mushroom that grew on it is suddenly food, you know? So yeah, I wouldn't want to make a call there, but straw for growing burdock when the whole point is that it gets in the soil and goes down deep and gets the minerals, I don't think it's so good an idea, you know? We did start plants. They're fast. I mean, they're not like celeriac. They go out pretty quick, and you can space them pretty good, you know, and then you're going to be harvesting them at the end of the, you know, you put them out in the spring, you want nice roots, you're not going to be picking them until this time of year, or digging them. You can though, I mean, you know, if you put a lot out and you don't want to buy burdock, you can just pick smaller ones. They're edible at any size, so you don't have to wait, but if you want bigger ones then, but the thing you don't want to do, if you want food, is let that thing start going to seed. Because then, tough and not good to eat. But there is an upside. If you miss them, it's going to make the big old flower. And I don't know that I've seen a lot of beneficial insect activity on the flowers, but lo and behold, gets infected with a black aphid. And those aphids then get covered up with all kinds of beneficials. So if you do miss some, see if you get the aphids. See what they do, you know. Oh, another thing to know about that is the advice is not to, I washed this so you could see it, but basically it keeps best if you don't wash it. So brush it off, but don't wash it, then it'll last a long time, you know. And did we answer your question well enough about the yacon and keeping? I don't know if everybody got to hear that. She was saying if you're breaking the yacon off, you're breaking it off to eat it. So actually I wouldn't break it off till I wanted it. So that kind of answers the question, I guess, right? I mean, meanwhile, it's feeding those reproductive parts, you know.
Yeah, but if you're trying to, like, I was thinking if you're trying to save them and save the reproductive parts and plant those, then, now like.
So let's just go back and look at that for a second. Okay, so there it is. I'm going to put that in a place that's going to stay cool but not be real cold, right? And have decent air circulation, but maybe not let it dry out totally, because I don't want I'm not too worried about the upper parts drying out, the reproductive parts, but I don't want these to dry out. So I might wrap it in burlap or something that's a little moist or something like that, I want one, I break it off. Meanwhile, the rest are sitting there, right? And later on, I want another one, I break it off. Those aren't going to rot because they're just like the thing now. That's a whole plant. It's all taking care of itself, right? It's not likely to rot like that. It's actually kind of alive still, right? And so I just harvest off the live plant. And these guys are getting to eat that plant too, and I'm fine with that, I mean, I'm not that big a fan of it anyways, so if I get to eat some, it's fine, But I like to eat it, so I don't care if they're getting to eat from it too. And eventually, I'll have harvested every last one off that, and that stalk will still be there. And then those guys will be feeding on the energy that's in that stalk and on the green that's there, that one little leaf. The plant is trying to be alive and doing everything it can to get energy to its future, And these guys here, they're not its future, but they're storing the future, because as long as they're on that plant, they're feeding that. So the plant's going to make sure it stays healthy. It's not going to rot. So I don't think we have to cure it. We just let it stay like that and break them off as we're ready to use them. And that sound like a good solution?
Yeah.
I didn't before. I broke them off and stuck them in the fridge, but that was a mistake, completely. Now I'd say just leave them on.
So then my other question is now that you've broken them off and you've used up what you wanted and you want to actually reproduce it, do you take the tuber, like the little red parts, do you actually use them like a tuber like you would with sweet potatoes and put them in the ground, or are you actually going to stick that whole green top?
No, I'd break them off. Yeah, that's what you see in the next thing. Each one can be broken off and be a separate plant. Yeah. So, but I wouldn't break them off until just before I'm going to plant them, because they're of course getting every last thing they can out of all that green and everything else. And that's how plants. Anybody ever like build a fence out of a tree, out of like locust or something, and see logs that have been cut down for like 3 months start growing? I mean, plants don't die like we do. They're taking every last shot at keeping going. They got other options, and so that's what's going on there. This is a biennial, so if you don't harvest it next spring, it's going to send up shoots and they're edible. So you can have a green vegetable if you don't harvest it, and really pretty flowers. So lots of uses for it. And these burdock are so wimpy, but they were the ones that were close. Okay, radishes. I am not a fan of summer radishes. I mean, there are radishes they say that you can grow in the summer. I'm sorry, they're always too hot for me, and I get indigestion. So I guess I don't have a lot to say about them. I'm a big fan of radishes for, let's say starting now. I wouldn't mind harvesting them now because it's cooled off. They're going to start tasting good, and then keep sowing so I can eat them all through the winter, and then sow through the spring so that they are finishing up when the days are starting to get up in the high 70s and the 80s, because that's when they start not tasting good to me. So those are the kind of ones that I talk about. One of my favorite ones is watermelon radish. If you plant watermelon radish even as late as October or as early as October, you'll get a plant and you can eat the seed pods, but you'll never get a root. You got to plant it kind of like between maybe the end of July and right about now. If you wait and plant it later in September, you'll get a small root, but it can make a softball-sized root. So if you really want to get the full advantage of it, you plant it as soon as you can. But has anybody here had watermelon radish? Yeah, pretty wonderful radish, isn't it?
Easy to grow.
Yeah, really easy to grow. Yeah.
It's more tasty than just a typical radish.
Yeah, I think it's juicy, sweet, and hot. If you've grown it, you talk about productive, you know how much volume you could get from that thing. I one time grew so much that it was filling up, it was like crowding a walk-in at the Highland Lake Inn, and they just weren't using them. And I just started talking to the chefs about how they could like shred them and put them on the buffets. They had all these groups coming through, and then people could put them in their salad bars and put them on their tortillas and all this stuff. And the head chef came and like started yelling at me. He said, "How dare you? How dare you have them waste those?" Because he was making pretty things out of them, making ribbons out of them, And it's like, Well, you may think I'm wasting them, but you're walking, it's crowded, and I got more in the ground, and if you don't use them, they're going to rot, you know. So, yes, they have a value as far as being able to be made pretty, but you can grow so much that you can both make them pretty and use them as a bulk vegetable. And that's pretty, I mean, I even cook them sometimes just because when I grow them, I have so many. If I'm going to use them up, I have to do it every way I can. And so other examples, there's daikons to grow in the spring, there's daikons to grow in the summer, there's daikons to grow in the fall that'll grow through the winter. And so you just get the catalogs out and read and they'll tell you, you know. And if you grow them at the wrong time, they don't work, you know. So there's a lot of radishes like that, and you just got to read the catalogs, it's not hard. And then there's some things like Easter egg radish, you can grow that anytime, you know. Or one of my favorites, this guy right here, Shunq, semi-long. I mean, like I said, I'm not growing that into the heat because I don't like radishes in the heat, but I can grow that any other time of year and it does great, you know. It is about that long and comes on really fast, and the greens are delicious to eat. And it's not as good as a watermelon radish, but it's got really nice flavor. You can cook it or eat it raw. It's a winner. Yeah, Johnny's has it, yeah, yep. And once again, I mean, why roots are so productive is how close you can grow them together. You know, and these catalogs that talk about rows, I mean, why would I grow a row of roots? Why would I let that space in between not be full of food? You know, I mean, I get, you know, maybe for some huge daikon, I want to have a little bit of space in between, but for like these kind of guys, I just have them, I have the whole bed full, and as I pull out, the other ones get bigger. But I'm picking them thumb size, and then they get bigger. You know, it's just like, why not eat the thinnings instead of, you know, yeah, later on, if I leave them in, there's going to be, none of them are ever going to get to their potential. But you can harvest so you get to eat the stuff that was in the space, and you still get the full potential of the ones that have been thinned out to. You do have to do that, though. You know, if you're going to put them in and forget about them, then maybe you want to space them better. But if you're looking for intensive production, then you just let that space be full, take them out and harvest them, you know, and you get them all. Flea beetles can be a problem. People know about Surround. Okay, Surround is a wonderful solution to a lot of pests. It basically is a superfine kaolinite clay, superfine. And essentially what's happening is you spray it on your plants with water so it sticks, right? And it gets washed off in the rain, so you might have to reapply it. But when the insects land on it, it's dried and it's dusty. And their furacles, their breathing holes, get clogged.
It's a clay, you say?
Yeah, it's a clay. It says on the bag you can ingest it. You know, and actually people eat clay sometimes, you know, for pulling stuff out of their systems. It's nothing but clay. It's just, you know, nothing but an irritant. But it works wonderfully. It has another benefit, which even for radishes would be good. Let's say I sprayed them. Usually I wouldn't spray it again because once the plant gets to a certain size, the flea beetle's not bothering enough that I care. It's when they're small. But let's say there was a hot early spring. I was surprised and my radish flavor is not going to be as good because it was hot early. If I sprayed the Surround on, it's going to be cooler because it's white and it reflects. And lo and behold, what they learned is that the Surround helps the plants to photosynthesize more. You know, probably less so.
It doesn't block it?
Yeah.
Photosynthesis?
Well, it does block some, but because even on a hot spring day, with the temperature on the leaf, now the air temperature may not be high, but you know, the sun hitting something can get that temperature up in the 90s. When it gets above 85, if they're not a cactus, the plant stops photosynthesizing. So by giving it a longer period of photosynthesis, the little bit of blockage is not as big an impact as the ability to photosynthesize more.
Do this on any of your crops, or is it?
Yeah, any crop that you don't mind having clay on. Yeah. I mean, you can go to some stores and you'll see apples with it on, you know, and they just have done the education. I tend not to put it on things like curly parsley or lacinato kale because I don't want to eat that much clay, and it's a lot of work to try and get it out of those things, you know. But it's not hard to get off. The thing to know is that with the brassicas, it's not as easy to get on because they have a waxy surface. So it may take a couple of applications to get the effect, you know. But the other thing is that a lot of these insects, they're hitting it when it's young. And if you make them really uncomfortable when it's young, they may never come back. By the time they come back, it doesn't matter because the plant has gotten ahead of steam and it can take what they've got to offer and still produce. You know, and as I said before, being eaten on means they're making more antioxidants, so it doesn't really matter to us either. Unless it's hot out and they're stressed, and then it's not going to taste good, you know. But the surround is helping you to solve that as best you can. We can't predict the weather. There's some, in this climate, we don't always get a fall like last year, and we oftentimes don't get a spring, right? It kind of goes from nasty and cold to super hot, you know. And when that happens, the quality of things like radishes, they're not my cup of tea, you know. I like them when they're growing cold. I'm not a big fan of them when they're not. Yeah.
Do you ever use diatomaceous earth?
The problem with diatomaceous earth is two. One is as soon as it gets wet, not very useful, you know. The other is you don't want to breathe it, you know. It is effective, but it's also very broad spectrum. So like a ladybug lands on this plant, right? She's immediately going to go like, well, there aren't that many bugs here and I can't breathe, and she's going to take off. She's not going to die, you know. But if she gets hit with diatomaceous earth, she's going to get cut up just as bad as that flea beetle, and she's dead. So, you know, there's three things I don't like about diatomaceous earth. Dangerous if we breathe it, you know. Doesn't hold up well in the weather. I mean, the surround doesn't hold up very well in the weather either, but it's easy to reapply. And it does hold up some, so you're getting some residual effect, and the fact that it's broad spectrum. You know, so no, I use it for house pests. Like, I was staying at a place once where I had a room, and the kitchen was in another building, and to get from the kitchen to my room, I walked over this floor mat in the hallway, and that was where the dogs slept all the time. And next thing I knew, I had fleas. Diatomaceous earth, you better believe it, you know. You know, I don't want to use poison. I wore a mask, I was careful, cleaned it up real well afterwards, but it took them out, you know.
So can you find that locally?
Diatomaceous earth?
No, I found that. Have you found?
Oh, surround, yeah, sure. Okay, I'm glad you asked that question. Crop production services. Now, they're going to look at you for an organic grower like you came from Mars, you know, because they're totally about conventional. Right? And you have to know, like, you know, surround is organic and you can use it. But like one time I was trying to get a kind of copper that was allowed in organic, and it was made by a company that made other coppers that weren't, and they assured me that it met NOP. And I got it, and then we started looking at it, and I figured out pretty quickly that I couldn't use it. And I'd left Fruit Growers Convention to spend 45 minutes missing a talk and not get my copper. You know, so just know that they're not at all, they're not anti-organic, they just don't know, they don't care, and they don't think about it. So you have to know exactly what you want and make sure you get it. But as Marshall said, when we used to buy from some other suppliers, things like Serenade, Surround, and stuff like that, he said, boy, they're real proud of their product. And I said, yeah, they're real proud of it, he said. And I said, so what do you mean real proud? He said, well, they think it's worth a lot more than they do at Crop Protection Services, that's for sure. You know, so. And I told a fellow farmer, Mike Asada, about it, and he said, Pat, you saved me 30% a year on my stuff. So they're much cheaper there than anywhere else. You know, you don't have to do anything, but if you want to try and, you know, stay within the organic standards, you can also, you know, meet NOP, but you have to understand what that means, you know. So you have to pretty much understand what's allowed and what's not allowed in organic, you know. And you may sometimes be wrong, but probably the difference will be minor. If you're not trying to certify, it won't be a big deal if you missed NOP by a little bit, you know. And everybody knows what I mean by NOP, National Organic Program. Yeah.
This surround only addresses food?
No, it addresses all kinds of chewing insects, yeah. Okay. Anything that wants to be on there and chew is going to have a hard time breathing. Oh, and this is a critical piece. You want to get it on there as soon as possible. If it's already learned how to eat there, it may decide that it likes its food and it's just going to not breathe good. You know, people live in some pretty uncomfortable situations if they're used to being in them. But if they arrive in a terrible place, the odds are good they can look somewhere else that looks better and they're going to go there. So that's why, you know, you don't wait to put it on. You put it on as soon as you think you're going to start having problems. And then it's pretty effective.
This one's like even caterpillars?
I think any insect, they all have to breathe, you know. It's an irritant. It functions as an irritant, you know. It's not 100% and it comes off, but sometimes it doesn't. Depends on the weather, you know. Depends on how well you got it on. Like I say, try and get it on a collard. It's not too easy, you know. Right. I mean, you know. But actually, the radish leaves are easier. They have more texture. It holds better, you know. Turnip leaves are easier. I use it a fair amount for flea beetles, but the creme de la creme of flea beetle control is beneficial nematodes, and we'll go into that. We'll talk about them, but I don't want to pretend that they're a sure thing. You know, you're working with a life form. We're going to do a whole class on it next year. Buying biology, you know. How to make the things, how to know where to buy stuff, you know, and how to take care of it until you're ready to put it in, how to put it out, and then how to make sure that it's working, you know. So that's going to be a whole class. Actually, it's going to be a class plus a short session, because we're also going to bring the adelgid predators for the hemlock woolly adelgid and release them in the fall, and then with a class in the spring, we'll go collect them. So it's going to be a pretty, you know, pretty comprehensive buying biology. And it won't just be insects, it'll also be like fungi and stuff like that too. You know, fungi that are attacking other fungi and stuff like that. There's even a fungi that attacks insects, but that's for next year, not for now. Okay, so alpine daikon, I love that one too. It comes on fast and fat, but short. It's about that big, but it comes on really fast, and the greens are good to eat too. It's a great one. Let's see. Any questions about radishes? There's some that I've never grown because they describe how hot they are, and I don't like them, like the black one. Yeah. You know, it's like, I don't want a fiery radish. I'm sorry, my gut doesn't like it. You know, it'd probably be good with beer, but I can just eat hot sauce. You know, and I don't get nearly as much indigestion. You know, I like the big radishes. I like the ones that get sweet when it's cold. That's my favorite kind, and I recommend. There's a huge world of them out there. You know, you can definitely play with them. Oh, a word about using them. You can definitely cook any radish, and they're really nice grilled. So play with them grilled, and like most brassicas, don't overcook them. You know, a fast cooking is way better than letting them sit there and caramelize, because you're gonna get that strong brassica flavor that's no fun. So a hot fire that gets some quick caramelizing is great, but get them on there quick and get them off, and they'll be a lot more enjoyable. Turnips, the stealth gourmet vegetable. And why I say that is for two different reasons. The first time I experienced it as a stealth gourmet vegetable was at the Highland Lake Inn. And this is like a family event place that like they started at the restaurant because the mom had a garden that they all ate out of. And so it was that inspiration. It was probably one of the first farm to table. It was probably the first really big, serious farm to table restaurant in Western North Carolina. And Lark, the chef member of the family, came in and said, I came into the kitchen, he said, I want you to try this. And he had one of those fancy tools that cuts things in perfect cubes, all the same size. And he was grilling purple top turnips. And he had done them in a vinaigrette before that and then grilled them. And they were just amazing and didn't taste anything like a turnip. And I was like, wow, your brother's got to taste this. I took it to Carrie Lindsay, and his mom was walking by too, and I handed it to her. And she couldn't tell what it was. And Carrie's response was, the turnip queen can't tell what a turnip is? She eats those things for breakfast. But actually it wasn't anything like a turnip. You know, you didn't have any of the strong turnip flavor. You had the crispiness, you had a subtle little background brassica flavor, and then you had a lot of presence of the grilling and the vinaigrette. So you can do pretty fancy things with them, yeah.
Also good fermented.
I'm sure they're great fermented. Yeah, I've put a few in, but I've never done. So you've done straight turnip fermentations? Yeah. Do you shred them or do you just do them sliced? Or?
I've tried always. They have
Small
those cute.
Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah. The other way they're gourmet is, are many people familiar with the baby white turnips? Yeah. Those are revelatory. If you catch them after plenty of cold, they got that buttery texture. They're sweet. At the same place, the Highland Lake Inn, a man from the Men's Isothermal Garden Club came out in January to tour. They were troopers. And he was in his 80s. And I went and dug out from under snow some baby white turnips, because they're really hardy. They'll take a lot of cold and not much damage. And I washed it off with the ice cold water from the pump, not the freeze-proof hydrant. And he took a bite out of this freezing cold turnip and said, why bother to grow apples? I mean, they were that good. They are fruity. They're just like amazing. And the other thing about them and the scarlet red stem is that you can grow those so close together. Once again, I mean, literally, I've grown the white ones. I haven't done it with the red stems yet, but I've grown them so that if there was one across each joint there, and then one across each joint there, there'd be one in between growing on top of them. And they're all making turnips, you know? And I just take the biggest ones and leave the smaller ones, and they get bigger. And eventually you get ones like this, but you're eating lots of ones that are like this, but you get them, you know? And then the other thing I love about, especially the smaller ones, is I'm a big fan of broccoli rabe, but I tend not to hit the timing of it very well. And those turnip leaves come really close, you know? The baby white turnip leaves with pasta and Italian kind of seasonings and stuff, totally wonderful. You know, the leaves are really great. It's just a rockin' vegetable for me. I just, you know, totally love it. And the scarlet, I'm just getting to know, they're not quite as buttery, but they're very similar. They got the sweetness, you know. They get a little bit bigger. Though I taught my friend at Troy's greenhouse to grow the white ones, and indeed I'll tell you in a moment, we found a better price on a different variety than the one Johnny sells. And he taught all of Burnsville, and now they're bringing in great big white ones. And they're fine. They're kind of a superior purple top. They're a little bit sweeter and a little bit softer, but they're more like a purple top than a baby white. Anyway, a tip is, you know, the price for the Hikuri, I think that's how you say it, from Johnny's is pretty darn steep. And I found years ago that Stokes had one called White Lady that was, I can't tell much difference myself. You know, they're both totally satisfy me. Maybe there's some subtle difference about Hikuri that makes it a little better, but not enough that I care. And so I just started buying the White Lady, but then I realized that if I bought it in bulk from Johnny's a lot, then it was cheaper than buying the small amounts I could get for the White Lady. And I just asked my friend at Choice, can you get me untreated White Lady? And literally, he got the company to give him the first run before they turn the treatment on. So he gets them untreated, and you can't get them any other way that way. But he gets them, he has them at Troy's greenhouse, and they're significantly cheaper. And he will mail them to you. He just told me, I just went in and got a pack the other day. And he said that, you know, he had a call from somebody in Georgia, and he mailed some off to Georgia. So it's Troy's greenhouse, Burnsville, North Carolina. And I'll give you the phone number. 682-6439. He also has good prices on a lot of other seed too. So I also love that if I don't get to all my turnips, then I actually get broccoli rabe, because broccoli rabe is basically a turnip that doesn't make a bulb. So any turnips that I don't eat, I don't mind at all, because I just pick the tops and use them like broccoli rabe. And I do successions. I mean, purple top, once again, I'm good at pushing things. I mean, usually people are saying to get the purple tops in August. I planted them as late as the middle or the beginning, as late as the beginning of the second week of September, and gotten a crop. Now, it probably was a good year, but it worked. And of course, if they came in later and were good and cold, they're all the better. You know, the more cold they get, the better they taste. But the baby whites and the scarlet, nonstop. Just keep sowing them, keep eating them. They never stop. They're not daylight sensitive. They just keep producing. Don't stop growing them until you can't grow them because the bugs are hitting them too. Eventually, you know, the turnips start getting all those little wormholes and stuff, and it gets too hot, and then it's time to stop growing turnips. But you can start growing those middle of August. They'll start cooling down enough that they'll be decent, and then as it gets colder, they'll be getting bigger and they'll start getting real good. Question back there?
Yeah. Do you have any problems with wireworms on turnips?
I haven't had problems in a long time. I've had them years ago, and I did trapping, you know. Have you had much problem?
They just devastated my turnips this year.
So the thing there would be nematodes, you know.
Yeah.
And so maybe we should cover nematodes right now. Pardon?
I did nematodes in the spring, and I'm going to do a reapply on that particular strain for wireworms this fall. But it was devastating to see.
Well, then the nematodes didn't work because they wouldn't be devastating if you, and so that's what I find. So maybe I'll just cover nematodes right now because I keep referring to them. So does everybody know what I mean by nematodes? There are a bunch of different kinds of nematodes. There are ones that feed on plants, and there are ones that feed on other soil organisms, okay? And that's what we want, is the ones that feed on other soil organisms. There's also ones, no, all of them get trapped by fungi. I was gonna say there's ones that trap, no, but that's the opposite, the fungi trap them. Anyway, we want the ones that feed on other soil organisms. And how they do is they go through those same holes, breathing holes, or through any other aperture on the insects that are in the soil, right? They swim in. They're like tiny, there's tiny little worms, but they're not microscopic. You can see them with a handheld lens, you know, and the way most people buy them is in sponges. So you can just see several swimming around inside each little sponge cell, okay? So they have to have water when they get in the soil. If the soil doesn't have water, they can't move because they swim. So to get where they're going, they have to have water. Now, once they get inside an insect, as long as that insect is alive, they're fine, you know? And then there's two kinds. There's the hunter kind that basically are moving around all the time looking for somebody to swim into. And then there's the trapper kind that just sits there and waits for somebody to come by and then gets in. Once they get in, they release, I think it's a bacteria that starts to eat the inside of the insect, and they feed on the bacteria. And then eventually the insect's no longer got any food, but they're mature. And the insect dies and they all come crawling out, and the cycle starts again. You can get them from a few places. You can get them from Bio Network, I think it's called, in Tennessee. You can get them from Gardens Alive, which is probably the most accessible one. I'm pretty sure that big companies like Peaceful Valley Farms and Harmony Farms sell them. If you go, and Rincon Ventova, I think is how you say it, is like a big time beneficial insect company. If you go online and punch in buy beneficial nematodes, and then you'll want to read and see which ones to get for what you're trying to solve, you know? Because if you're trying to, let's say, take out an insect that is moving around a lot, then maybe the trapper will get it, you know? But if it's one that's kind of just staying still somewhere, maybe the swimmer has to get to it, you know? So, I mean, both of them are swimming, but one keeps moving until it finds something.
That's just another thing to kill.
It controls.
Besides that surround.
Yeah, it's okay. Surround doesn't kill; it just kind of repels. Okay, and they're working on the same bug, but they're working very differently. You know, it's for all soil pests, soil-based pests. So like flea beetles, cutworms, fleas and ticks, termites. You know, wireworms, Japanese beetles, June beetles, June bugs. Winter, if we had one that would just be able to stay active in the colder weather, then it'd be the perfect solution for the only pest we have in the winter, which will attack your carrots and stuff too, which is the vegetable weevil. The problem is it doesn't hatch out till these guys are going to sleep. But I've heard from my entomologist friend, Richard McDonald, that there are in the wild ones that are active at 45 degrees. If we could just get them to decide that there are enough winter gardeners that they can make a market for it, they could sell those to us, and that would greatly expand the ability of these guys to do their job. So how do we use them? If you're buying them from the places I just mentioned, they're going to come in a sponge. You put them in water, and you kind of gently squeeze them, and they get out. And you've got to water them out pretty quickly. You know, you want to keep that aerated if you're going to take a fair amount of time. But once you water them out onto the ground, you can spray them with a sprayer or water them with a can. But however you get them out there, you have to immediately have a reasonable amount of water from a sprinkler, but not a torrent, you know? Not a torrent, but not a fine mist. Enough that they get washed into the soil. Because if they stay on plants or on the surface and they're getting hit by UV rays, within 7 minutes they're sterilized. And since the way it works is they swim in, they eat, and they reproduce inside the bug, the way they kill them is by having all these babies that eat the bug to death. And if they don't have babies, they're not going to work. So you got to get them to stay, you know, fertile. You know, if they're not fertile, yeah, they got to stay. They got to be. It's not so much moist as they have to get washed down so they can get into the soil so the UV rays don't kill them. And that's the rub. At first, for years, I didn't even know that. I think I mentioned already that I solved my carrot rust fly problem on parsley with beneficial insects. I got lucky a few times. I put them out. The rain was right, and they got in. They didn't get UV light killed and all that. And then I didn't have good rain, and I had no idea that I only had 7 minutes to wash them in. So I'd do the whole garden, and then I'd come back and hose. Well, guess what? The only part that was going to work was going to be the very back end if I hosed in a hurry. And otherwise, I didn't get any action at all. And I found out, like, 5 years after I'd started using them from the guy that I bought them from, because my irrigation pump died. I said, if I put them out, can I come back in and get them in the morning with the irrigation pump being fixed? He said, if you get them just as the sun's coming up, but just know this. And then he told me that. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me that 5 years ago? You know? That would have changed everything about how I do it, you know. And then, lo and behold, I learned, I don't know, 10 years later, that if you have way too heavy a rain, that doesn't work either. I guess they get washed past where they need to be and they don't get back, or maybe they get beat up by the rain, but it doesn't work. It can't be a pounding rain. When did I learn that? After I helped friends at Goldfinch Farm buy a huge amount of them to do their entire farm, and they stayed up all night in a pounding rain putting them out. You know, and then the next year, and they said it didn't work at all. And I said, I don't know why, you know. You had all the rain you can need, and then the next year I can't have too much rain. So unfortunately, and that's a lesson, not just for growing roots, but for growing anything. If you're buying anything that's supposed to solve a problem for you, your salesman is your consultant. And they may be in a hurry to get off, but they're not going to refuse to answer your questions. You know, and it's actually fair, because if they do a good job, you're coming back, you know. So it pays off. Make sure they tell you everything. Now, if I buy something, I say, how could I go wrong? What are the things I need to know that would make this not work? What are the tricks I can use that can be sure that it does work? And it's amazing how much more they can tell me than they do, because of course they want to sell the next product. But they will, and I'll come back to them if what they give me works, and if it doesn't work, I'm not coming back. So it's fair, and I highly recommend that you do it that way. We actually use compost. We buy from a guy named Charlie Clark, who makes a compost that has the nematodes in it, and then we brew tea. And it seems to work better because they have like more of the microbial community that they're used to. There's probably foods in there. There might be other stuff that is prey so that they don't get eaten because other things are getting eaten instead. So overall, they seem to do better. But even then, the water's got to be right. And I thought, we have sprinklers out there now that can water the entire garden. I thought that meant that we were assured success. It was going to work. Sprinklers don't do it. A sprinkler, you know, a little bit of water hitting every, you know, how many seconds is not the same as a steady rain, you know. So it hasn't worked using the sprinklers. We have to try and time it. And there might be a reason not to do the tea, because you've added another whole level of complexity. You have to have the tea be ready. And so if the tea's not ready, even if the rain's perfect, you're not using it.
Could you integrate them into a drip line?
They work great in a drip line, but they only work, the thing is, okay, so the ones that swim around, the hunters, they're going to be fine. But the trappers are only going to be where your drip line is. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, you know. But if it's something that, you know, they can get to and they swim around, then it's going to work great. Or if the only thing you're trying to protect is by the drip line, then it works too. But the problem actually that won't work, because you can't just spray the garden, you have to spray the edges too. Because they'll be on the edges and they'll come in. And if you do the drip line, even though you've controlled, well, it would work for root crops, because the root crops, that's where the pest is. But it wouldn't work for above the ground crops, you know, because then they come in from out, you know, outside and they cause the problem. And anything else, you know, that moves through the soil and then went down to the root crop, that wouldn't work either, because they will come from other places. But when we've had it work, you know, I'm not looking at the root crops. We don't basically have a lot of insect problems on the root crops, but our big thing is flea beetles. That's our big reason why we want the nematodes. And when it works, it's like this time of year, or even earlier, hotter, and we put out arugula, Chinese cabbage, mustard, no holes. No holes. You know, that's called working, you know. And then maybe 3 weeks down the road or something, a couple of holes, because eventually they're going to move in for somewhere. If some are going to survive and start producing, yeah.
Do you always try to time it with the rain, or can you just water it in with your...
Well, I watered them in and had it work when I only had a small area, but a big area like this, I don't think so. I think the rain's the way, yeah.
So do you feel like you need vegetation on the soil for that to work, or can you water them in?
No, if you got them watered in, I don't think they care about the vegetation, you know. The vegetation might slow them down even. They land on that, they got to get off that to the ground to keep going, you know. But as long as they're in the ground and have enough water to move, they're working. Indeed, Richard McDonald tells a story of back before China went the GMO chemical way, they were doing a lot of biological stuff, and some biologists got a prize like the science prize for the whole country for injecting them into trees, because they could swim through the vascular system, and they took out the borers. So the trees would just see, these trees had tons of borers, and they'd all just drop to the ground, you know. So it works, but we haven't got it figured out.
So you have to water them all the time? to
No,
keep the state-
once they're in,
Okay.
you know. I mean, we spent a bunch of money trying to get them to control termites, which I don't think we had, but we had them, so we wanted to be sure we didn't get them back, ticks and fleas. And we did that last fall, which was really stupid because we were in a drought. And they didn't work very well. And then, because the ground was so dry, I asked Diane to water every day, but she just couldn't water enough. It was just too dry. You know, it's not going to work if the soil can't get moist enough that there's water that a thing can swim on in the soil. So it's got to be, and then to be sopping wet, but you got to be able to pull it up and squeeze it and see a little bit of water in your hand, like a few drops or something. That's going to be enough. Otherwise, it's not going to work. I mean, it hasn't worked for me anyway, yeah.
So just so I kind of understand the full system of it, if you plant something, you seed arugula, something like that, you seed it and then spray the nematodes and then water it and then put down your drip line and you drip line it whatever, every day or every other day. Is that a sufficient amount of water?
Well, if you were putting the nematodes out now, that arugula is going to get eaten up. You want the nematodes to have been building up from the spring, and they give you control for now. And so what we haven't done, actually, is what we should do this year. We still have time. We should be putting them out now so that we knock the pest levels way back for spring, you know, and then put them out again in the spring. And you'll never get complete control, I think, in the spring because you've got the whole winter for the nematode levels to drop. They're going to go to sleep and whatnot. But if they knock back the pest a lot right now, there won't be as many pests in the springtime. But the springtime is the most powerful time to use them.
Do you
So
put them on a crop right now that you're trying to produce, or do you put them on, I don't know, a cover?
no, you don't put them on crops. You just treat your whole garden because you need to treat your whole garden because they're going to move in, you know. So you treat your whole garden, and it's a systemic cure that you do, like it's a best practice, you know. In the springtime, you treat, and then
All you treat,
yeah,
and then that
yeah,
takes care of it
right.
year-round.
yeah. And they do occur naturally. I haven't figured out how to get them to ever reach levels that would give us that kind of control, you know. And the one question I have, everybody says they don't hurt beneficials. I don't really see how they can. They definitely don't hurt worms. Worms are not part of their thing. But beneficial soil insects that are just other insects, I think they're going to take those out too. So you are kind of making that choice, but you're not getting complete control. I mean, you know, every time you do it, it's going to run down eventually. So basically, if you do it in the spring, we kind of do it in like late April. So soil temperature, I got there. Soil temperature wants to be above 60, but below 80. So late April, that's pretty easy to hit. So we do it then. We may do it 2 times or 3 times, you know, and that'll give us control. We don't even notice if we have control or don't have control because it's flea beetles we care about until we plant the fall crops. We probably had control sooner than that, but I mean, I guess the flea beetles hit the eggplant, but years ago I figured out that grow a big eggplant, and if you need to put some surround on, the flea beetles are no big deal. You know, put a little eggplant out there that's not too healthy and don't protect it with surround, and the flea beetles will kill it. But we don't really worry about that. But so I haven't looked to see, but there probably are years that there just aren't any flea beetles on the eggplant because it's already working. But I can't say that for sure. We don't grow flea beetle susceptible crops until fall. We apply in the spring, and it's not going to work for our finishing spring crops. It's not going to build up enough. But by June, I bet it is working so that if you put little eggplant out, I bet you they can make it. But I don't do that. We always do our eggplants in the big 6-packs. So they're a pretty stout plant, and the flea beetles don't bother us. And if for some reason it's a bad year, we use a little bit of surround, and it solves the problem. But come fall, then we got turnips, we got radishes, we have everything those flea beetles love. And they'll take the radishes and the turnips down pretty bad if you don't have something to slow them down. And this helps a lot, you know. And indeed, plenty of years, but nowhere near 100%, you know. Something like 60%, I guess. I think we're about 60% successful. We're more successful than not, but our failure rate is much greater than I'd like. And I'm pretty convinced it's about the water. I think it's, you know, got to figure out how to And I'm almost wondering maybe we should stop using doing it the compost tea way. Even though when they work better than I ever saw without the compost tea. But it makes it harder to hit that window, So maybe we should do a batch of compost tea, hope we get it right, but then also do some that we can wait until the weather's right. Because they can sit in your fridge for a couple weeks. So you could have them in your fridge, and in that couple of weeks, if it's a typical time around here, you're going to have the right rain. It's going to be a serious rain, but not a gully washer. And so that's the way to do it, I think. And also for small gardeners, Charlie Clark's too expensive. He's making it for 100-gallon things, and it's not cheap to buy one. So, but you could, for a small area, you can get a pretty good amount from someplace like Gardens Alive. And Richard McDonald used to say that Gardens Alive was the best because he knew the nematologists that worked for them, and he said he's one of the best in the country. But I think that guy retired, but maybe he taught his coworkers, they may still be the best, I don't know. I used to buy from them, they worked fine. Yeah.
If I was to grow turnips during the winter, do I have to cover that up? Or?
Okay, so I found that the baby whites and probably the reds make it through a lot of the winter without being, eventually, when it starts getting down around 15 and 10 and stuff, they don't die, but they get that kind of frozen corkiness at the top. You know how root crops can get? And that just gets worse and worse the more they freeze. So I recommend row cover, but row cover should do it for you pretty much. Do people understand that why plants are hardy is because they can move the water out of their cells so it doesn't rupture? And indeed, once they've moved it out, it's surrounding their cells and kind of working like an igloo. So they're losing less heat on those sides. And so if a plant has the ability to move the water out, all you got to do is be sure that it has enough time to do it. So crops that are just a quarter hardy can go way into the deepest of colds if you give them enough protection that they don't freeze until they got the water out. And if you do winter gardening, you know that things like lettuce, turnips, all those things can freeze solid. And when they thaw out, they're perfectly fine because they didn't freeze so fast that they got damaged. And that's it. All those kinds of things, you protect them as you need to, as much as you need to. And I've learned over the years that that changes every winter. And a wild card, and I don't really understand the science of this very much, I guess they have to remember how to do it maybe, because every, 10 years or something, maybe 15 years, we get a November where in the first week or so, the temperatures are in the teens. You remember some of those? They're brutal. And guess what? All those things that with a little bit of cover can make it, they don't make it. And so I guess they have to get hardened off, get used to the cold slowly, and then they can do it. I've lost kale. I've lost kale with fabric over it because last week it was in the 70s and this week it's 12. And that just takes them out. They can't handle it.
Talking ground cover, you talking about building a tunnel?
Well, okay, so like for the roots, if you want to eat, let's say the shunku and the baby whites and stuff, I like to eat the greens, so I don't want them to get damaged because I don't want to have to pick the bad parts off. So those I'd probably use hoops. But let's say it's one of the other daikons that, well, you can eat the greens, but they're not my favorites, and I got plenty of other greens, so I don't bother. Then I probably wouldn't worry because a little bit of damage happens. It's not going to cause enough rot on a plant that's still alive in the ground that's going to affect the harvest. So it's just that where the cover touches, that doesn't have the insulation, so that's going to freeze faster, and sometimes that gets damaged. But if you have just a little bit, so that there's a little airspace. In fact, the smaller the airspace, the better the protection, because convection is what's going to be moving that heat out, and if it can't rise as high and fast, the higher it is, the better it rises out, and so you don't want a big airspace. And literally, you can keep all of these roots. Even the ones that aren't hardy at all, like those Bolivian tubers, I'm sure we can keep those going into November if we're really willing to use plastic and fabric. Most years, not counting that occasional early brutal November. Then all bets are off and we just had ourselves a bad November. But by and large, I don't think there's a tuber here that you can't grow into probably Thanksgiving. And then you might start getting, then we start kind of reliably start getting those lower temperatures, and they might not be able to get the water out quick enough. Though, one time I had a friend who learned how to grow winter stuff from me and called me up after Christmas and said, I got all this stuff and I need to sell it. And I said, what is it? And lots of it was stuff like the celery that it had enough cold that it vernalized. So very soon it was going to go into seed. And I rushed over because he had a huge greenhouse full. And I just had to, it was going to be bolting. I expected to see them starting to bolt already, and nothing was bolting, and I just couldn't figure it out. It's like, wait, I know these things are going to be bolting. The light is at the right place. It's had enough cold. Now the days are getting longer. It's going to bolt. And then I finally figured out. I saw there was a tomato solanaceous weed that wasn't frozen. And I said, wait a minute, it's never frozen in here, right? And he said, nope, it's never frozen. He had so many layers that he kept it from freezing. So you could literally keep even these Bolivian things probably going for as long as you want if you're willing to do, a layer of fabric, a layer of plastic, and then another layer of plastic. What he did was he had a layer of fabric and then he had another layer of plastic over that inside a double-walled greenhouse. It got to 14, 12 and stuff, but it's still not going to freeze with that much protection, And so you have as much control as you want. You can get as much production as you want from any of these root crops, depending on how much protection you want to give them. And of course, the longer you keep alive, things like rutabagas, the better they're going to be, And actually, rutabagas, we didn't cover rutabagas. They're not on there.
You haven't talked about beets.
Beets are coming. They got their own whole section because they're chenopodium. Yeah. But rutabagas are critical. Rutabagas, how many people here like rutabagas? All right, after my own heart. Years ago, the turnip queen that I talked about looked sadly at me and said, you disappoint me. Because I just finished telling a group that I was touring that the one vegetable that I didn't like, and I had no shame for not liking it, was rutabagas. And that's because I'd been eating rutabagas from the store, which had been grown in heat, were covered with wax, and were old. And when I cooked them, they had a flavor that made me want to gag. And then she said that, and it's like, I should pay attention to them. Maybe there's something there. We agree about everything else. And we had these ones that had grown through the winter. It was like January, and they were there. And have you ever had a rutabaga that's had so much cold that when you cut it open, it's actually yellow inside? I don't know why that happens, or maybe it's just how long they've been growing. But they get yellow, they're not white. And they get incredibly rich, and when you cook them, they're kind of like a cross between squash and brassica. And they're just astoundingly good. And I started eating those things, I started having them for breakfast. And I started having other roots for breakfast, and then one day I was like doing the dishes, and Diane got up later than me, and she was eating the breakfast I made, and I heard her say, my hero, and I'm like, what? And she said, roots for breakfast. I could go all day. And it's true, you have roots for breakfast, boy, and you do not crash. I mean, that is slow release nutrition. And the rutabagas were what got me into it. They were just revelatory. And I haven't had them as good as that. That was the perfect time, but I've come close. And when I cut them and they're white, it's like, that's pretty good, but I'm waiting for them to start getting yellow a little bit. And it's the longer they're in the ground, the better they get. Yeah?
Do you bake them, or how do you eat them?
I oftentimes stir fry them or steam them. I do bake them sometimes, but usually I'm in more of a hurry than that, So I slice them thin, just quickly steam them or simmer them or something, but I also times just saute them too. I may shred them and saute them. I once again grilled on the George Foreman grill. The George Foreman grill, if we're talking root crops, I got to talk about that. Good old George. I actually had, in my winter vegetable class, they said, you should actually contact him and say that he needs to hire you to get on TV and sell to the vegetarians. Because that is a wonderful tool for bringing the essence out of roots. I already talked about what it did with artichokes, but likewise, with a rutabaga, just brush a little olive oil on it, put it on there, let it cook until it's got the brown marks on it and stuff, and it just caramelized it and made it just spectacular. And likewise, I slice it thin enough that it cooks pretty quick, and just set them on there and grill them. It doesn't take long at all. I've ever made dishes like pastas and stuff where I'm doing other stuff and I'm grilling the roots on the George Foreman grill, and that's how they go in. I then chop them up more and toss them in, and they're just way more interesting than sautéing or steaming, So. Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's actually, I was going to kind of do that as a part, which is all the other parts you can eat on these plants, but I'll just say it right now. They might as well be kale, right? I mean, can you tell the difference between the rutabaga leaves and the kale? I can't. You know, they're just as, I mean, it's not eating the rutabaga leaves is wasting a wonderful vegetable. You know, it's just as good as kale. And it's going to be just as sweet if it's cold. I mean, perfectly spectacular. And so, yeah, it's a double vegetable if you're selling it to somebody. You know, they're getting their bunch of kale and their rutabaga in the same thing. And rutabagas are one of the better keepers. I mean, you put those in the crisper in the drawer, and boy, I pulled one out. It was June, and it was still wasn't as good as it was in November, but it was still worth eating. You know, I mean, they keep really well. I don't know why they wax them. I never could figure that one out. You know, but they do, and I don't eat them. You know? I don't touch them. You know? Pardon? Yeah, when you see them in the stores, they wax them.
I know, just for transport.
Yeah, yeah, but I don't buy them, so I don't have to worry about it. Yeah. Okay, that's there. Oh, that's why I didn't talk about rutabagas. Brutally reviled, rocking and awesome. I mean, and I was one of those. I mean, I was a trader. You know, now I'm converted. I have seen the light. But I really believe they got to be the equivalent. I mean, a good local farmer is going to be just as good. But I don't think you can do them on mass scale. I think if they're stressed, do you know what I mean about that nasty taste? There's just a taste that if you've got them, cooked them if you've had them in the heat, or they're old, or you overcook them, they're just like, ooh, it's distinct to the rutabagas, and I can't stand it. And I never have it cooking them the way I cook them, growing them this way. But the first rutabagas I had were like that, and they were nothing for me. The greens, yeah, all the greens, totally wonderful. They'll go straight through the winter. Like I said, I used plastic and didn't have a structure. They were fine. I didn't know about eating the greens then, though. So I wasn't worried about the green damage. Now I might do a little bit of structure to protect those rutabaga greens. You know, the parsnip greens I wasn't going to eat, so I wasn't worried about that at all. But harlequin bugs. People know about harlequin bugs? Yeah. So we don't have a lot of problem. The harlequin bugs, they'll hit the turnips and stuff, but the turnips are so fast it doesn't tend to be a big problem. But rutabagas can be taken down by them. So you got to take care of them. And there's a few ways to deal with the harlequin bugs. The most effective probably is hand picking, but it's not hand picking when they're in outbreak. It's hand picking before they ever get there. So it's about scouting, right? It's about letting your peripheral vision get really attuned and walking around, and what you're looking for. Now this is one picture I wish I had. I gotta remember to get one now, of harlequin bug damage. People know what harlequin bug damage looks like? Pardon? It's not holes, actually. It's whitish to brownish. It's kind of like an animal that they scrape it. They don't chew through, they scrape it. Or suck it or something, but it's not gone through. It's this light colored. It's not white, but it's not dark. It's light colored damage. And if you see that early on, the odds are excellent there'll be a whole lot of harlequin bugs on that plant. Because they're gregarious, they have to protect their eggs from parasitoids, from insects that fly to the eggs and lay eggs in them for their young to hatch out. So what they do is they kind of like have a shepherd for the eggs. One at a time or two at a time are watching the eggs while the rest are eating. And so they have to be a team, you know? And they're all in one place. They're not hard to get them. In fact, Charles Church, a broccoli grower, and many other kind of growers, a mountain farmer who became a solid organic grower, and just loved the fact that he could sell pallets and pallets of purslane. Loved it, you know. Was very innovative, and he would plant his broccoli, but it could be rutabagas, right? Mechanically, like with a mechanical planter, and you never get 100% take doing that. When he came back in, he did not replace with broccoli. He replaced with mustard, because they're more attracted to the mustard. And so he didn't have to look for any old broccoli and look at all of them. He only had to look at the mustard. And then he came through with a flamer and flamed the mustard and took out all the harlequin bugs, you know. Another one you can do is grow, just went out of my head the minute I want to say it, the cleome. Cleome must be related to broccoli because it gets covered up with harlequin bugs. And so you just let them hit that, and then just, basically that's an easy plant to do too, because you can kind of get like a big kind of bushel basket with some soapy water in the bottom, and just lean the whole thing over and whack it. And they, what their first defense is to drop. So you use that against them. And you can take a lot out in a hurry, But then you might want to come back with soap, and Richard says about 20% stronger than the label is more effective, and spray those infected plants so you get any that you missed and you damage the eggs. And if you're taking care of all that, then you're good.
Soap and what?
Soap alone, but I've also
Soap and, you said mixed with
about 20% stronger than the label.
Oh, stronger than
Yeah, right. But basically, if you're doing that, you want to do it where you know the content. You don't want to do that everywhere, because that soap will hurt things like ladybugs and stuff too. It won't kill them, but it'll damage them. And actually, it might kill them. It's strong stuff, It's basically dissolving the waxy cuticle, and why people think it doesn't work is because it dries out. It dries them out. They don't die immediately. It's not a pleasant death. So you spray the soap, you look, you say, oh, it didn't kill them. That doesn't mean that 2 days later they're not dead. The trick is to scout early and just treat the places with the major infections. And then you're not having to spray everywhere and kill other things or hand pick everywhere. So that's really the trick to the harlequin bugs. You can also use surround, it'll slow it down. Like hammer them where they are, make them not want to go to any place else. Make them want to leave and go find some creasy greens on the edge or something. And then you got pretty good control.
I got one rutabaga question. How far do you space them apart?
I give them some space, right? Perfect timing. See the size of these guys? They get pretty big, I'd say I give them like at least 18 inches because I want them to get big. I like big rutabagas. They're fun.
You don't practice the heavy seed and thin.
I don't tend to do that. I do plants with those. I don't seed them, If I did seed, I would, of course, I always do because I want a perfect take. And I will. Those, I could eat them at any stage because the greens would be salad greens when they were young. So there'd be no problem. You could definitely sow them as thick as you want, as long as you're thin. And of course, you could do them at a foot. They'll just be smaller tubers, but they'll be just as much. You'll get the, probably. I doubt that you'd want to bother doing the math to see what the difference was. You'd get enough that it wouldn't matter. So this is rutabagas in a no-till operation. And remember I showed you the parsnips, they weren't too happy. These guys did great. I don't know, do you remember those rutabagas, how big they were?
Yeah.
From that field, boy? They were big. They were, not all of them. Some were duds, that's always the case, but lots of them were huge, And they went in considerably later than a lot of people say they have to go in, but they had what they needed, and they just did great. And you don't have to, because they're not trying to push their root down into the soil, they're sending a tap root down and making that other one sometimes barely in the ground at all, right? They don't care if it's hard soil. They got that oomph to push their way down, get the minerals and grow, and they didn't miss a beat. Parsnip, on the other hand, it needs to have something a little bit better to get where it's going. So yeah, I get hungry just looking at those greens. Yeah, they're pretty great. And so this here, all we did was, I think we used the potato plow actually. I think we just ripped a row with the potato plow, came in, threw some compost in, pushed the soil back in, and planted. And if we had, now we have a no-till seeder that would make an even, right then we made a space about that big. Now we got something to do something that big. And that's big enough to put the plant in. You don't need to do very much at all. You don't need to till, and you're on the way, And literally, there's clover and stuff growing in there, but weeds too. We just came through with the weed eater and kept them down. Put straw right between them, so they got ahead, but that was it. And you could use leaves or anything else. Really, the ideal thing is to come through and mow all this, rake it up and save that for your mulch before you plant, you know. And then you could keep mowing and just raking over, and that stuff would be part mulch and part food. Very slow, you know, it'd be green, so it'd be offering a little bit of nitrogen, but not enough that it'd be causing the kind of problems that we worry about. Okay, that's them harvested, and the ones that we got were a lot bigger than that, but that's, you know, they're nice. You know, I'd be glad to have those. They're a little more uniform. It must have been nicer soil. The ones that I have are a little bit more weird shaped, you know. But they're great eating no matter what.